One day, little Michelle was sitting in front of the TV, engrossed by the show that she's watching. Her mother calls her in for dinner. No response. A second time she calls her, this time with a slightly raised voice. No response. A third time she called and she said, "Michelle, shut off that TV at once and get in here quickly." Well, Michelle jumped out of her seat, shut off the TV, ran to the kitchen, and said, "Mom, sorry, I didn't hear you the first two times." See, a lot of times what happens is that we think we're listening, but we're really not. We're hearing things, but not really listening. If you look at the scriptures, all parts of the scriptures, not just the Gospels, but going all the way back to the beginning of the Old Testament, there is a tremendous amount of times that God is calling people to different things. It's something that comes up over and over and over again. And they don't do it because they think we're stupid, but because we really are not always paying attention. We're not always listening. When you look around at the world that we live in, you realize that there's a real shortage of really, really good listeners. And especially in the world that we live in, not just COVID, but just the busyness, the hecticness, the kind of going from one thing to another, even multitasking, et cetera, et cetera. And really listening is something that is very, very high energy. I think sometimes we might think of listening as, being laid back, but that's not the truth. True listening, when you go to work and on being a counselor and all this, spend hour after hour after hour preparing you to be that kind of a total listener. And I think that we have to look at ourselves and say, where am I on that? Some people just talk a lot. And when we're talking all the time, it's pretty hard to listen, whether it's God or whether it's other people. Some people are distracted, daydream, et cetera, et cetera. And still others are talking even before the other person has stopped saying what they're going to say. And that's never a good thing in terms of communication. And so we have to really, like I say, personalize it. Husbands do it to wives, wives to husbands, parents and children, friends, neighbors. It happens all the time. When it happens with God, He gives us a good shake. And we hear it. We should hear it as we heard tonight's readings. The Good Shepherd is not just a functional shepherd. There's lots of people who could act as shepherds, who could gather the sheep, take care of the sheep to a certain point, and do the job. But as the analogy that Jesus uses, He says, but when something happens, when the wolf comes, and remember, the wolf is a literal thing for a shepherd, but the wolves in our lives, the wolves in our world, the wolves in our society, what happens? Fair weather friends run away. Real relational friends, people who care about us, that we care about, we don't run away. Those are the moments that we need each other most. And so listening, to me, is one of the most affirming acts of love and respect that we can give to anyone. God speaks to us. He wishes to guide us. He wishes to teach us. And it does start with the Scripture. But it also happens through many people in our lives through which God speaks. He placed them there. When we affirm another person's worth when we stop to listen, we tell them, you're important. One of the most terrible things is when, you're listening to someone and someone else steps in, and then we're quickly distracted. Undivided attention says to the other person, and says more importantly to our God as he speaks to us, I care enough about you to stop and to truly listen. And so week after week, the shepherd teaches us how to live, how to love, how to forgive, how to trust, and how to succeed in living as God calls us to live, as God sees what real success is. We can discover the true meaning and the purpose of our lives, but only if we stop, only if we pay attention. Lent is that time when we have so much that we're called to reflect and be quiet and sacrifice and so on and so forth. But now in this Easter season, the same is really true with a whole different background. We are supposed to be, in a sense, relishing and basking in the resurrection. That's the definition of who we are as Christians. Resurrection in terms of our literal resurrection of our lives at the end of our life, but also the many resurrections that take place throughout our lives. Just like those storms come and those difficult times come, so too do the opportunities to really be part of what the Good Shepherd offers us. And so God is calling you and me all the time. Whether we know it or not, whether we believe it or not, it's the truth. And like I said, we have this generic calling of the shepherd. But the shepherd, the way that is described here, there's a relationship. It's not just a guy who gathers them together. They hear his voice and they know him. They trust him. And that is the voice of God in our lives. Are we paying attention to that, or are there too many other voices that are taking away from that? Let's not wait to be called 3 times. God is not going to raise his voice in order to get our attention. As a matter of fact, most of the time, God is whispering. God is just kind of putting it out there. God is saying, you have the free will and the choice. I desire relationship with you. Do you desire relationship with me? God is speaking to you, and God is speaking to me. We hear it, but are we listening?